What's up, y'all? Welcome to War on Culture. I'm your host, Uncle Chisel, and this is the program where we rewrite and redefine what's possible for young people seeking God and financial freedom. Stay tuned, we got a good one for you today. All right. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of War on Culture. Today, we're going to cover old school opinions versus new school outlook. Now, I don't know which side of the measure y'all hang on. I'm definitely old school. You can tell by the gray hairs, you know what I'm saying? But we're going to dive into a couple different things about the subject because there is a very big divide, and I feel like division is where the devil wants us. And we're going to come together right here, right now. So usually, we always open with a Bible verse or two, just to give you a perspective, seeing as I am a God-fearing man. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about me. I recently converted back to Christianity. I am now an avid follower of God. I made a lot of bad mistakes in my life that brought me to this place that I'm at right now. But by the grace and glory of God, I'm still here to be able to share a message with you that I find is probably going to be really, really important. Well, not probably. It is. If I said it, it's definitely like that. You know what I'm saying? So, without further ado, we're going to give God his credit. And the first verse from the Bible comes from 1 John chapter 2, verse 7. And it says, "Dear friends, I am not writing you a new command, but an old one, which you have had since the beginning. This old command is the message you have heard." Glory to God. I got another one for you to open up your perspective. This comes from a parable that Jesus said. It's Luke chapter 5, verse 36 to 39. He told them this parable. "No one tears a piece out of a new garment to patch an old one. Otherwise, they will have torn the new garment, and the patch from the new will not match the old. And no one pours new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the new wine will burst the skins, the wine will run out, and the wineskins will be ruined. No new wine must be poured into new wineskins, and no one, after drinking old wine, wants the new. For they say, the old is better." So, a couple things I want to cover today as we get into the old school and new school topic. There's a couple definitions that a lot of people throw around really, really lightly. And in this episode, we're going to cover a lot of these different definitions. And just want you to have a clearer understanding of what these things are and how these things came to be. First definition that I'd like to give you is from the word culture. It's in the show, bro. I got to do this one. So culture can be defined as all the ways of life, including arts, beliefs, and institutions of a population that are passed down from generation to generation. Now, anthropologists describe culture as a set of learned behavior and ideas that human beings acquire as a member of society. Now, society, since that was the last word in the last one, is going to be the next definition we look at. And society is described as an organized group of persons associated together for religious, benevolent, cultural, scientific, political, patriotic, or other purposes. Now, sociologists describe society as a group of people who live in a definable community and share the same cultural components. Getting interesting, very interesting. Now, these next three, I'm going to cover a little bit more. I have some questions and topics to come up with these ones. But these next three are kind of words that people use all the time and they don't really know how these apply to what their daily life consists of. So the first one is interactions. And interactions is described as the action or influence of people, group, or things on one another. The next one is outlook. I love this word. Now, outlook is a person's point of view or general attitude to life. And the third one, I think this one is the most important one out of all of them. Because enough people don't have this, and it's purpose. Purpose is described as the reason for which something is done or created, or which something exists. Woo! Young people, we got a whole bunch of stuff for you, and even old people too, you know what I'm saying? Because like, old people or the old school, you don't have to be old to have an old school perspective, but usually the purpose of things in any perspective is to try and further your agenda, whatever that is, positive or negative, right? And a lot of people lack purpose, unfortunately. That's terrible. But we're gonna get into that a little more, you know? I'm not talk off your ear so much. Let's go over some of the things that I came up to find as the differences between, you know, the old school and the new school. Because they're both mindsets, which means you can easily adapt, you can change, you can take piece, you can do a heap of things, but it's better to understand the differences before we condemn the opposition, as they call it, ops, you know what I'm saying? It's better to understand them than to condemn them. So some of the differences that come up in the old school versus the new school. And now these are just some general distinctions. This is not, you know, written in stone anywhere. But one of the differences they have is in technology and communication. The old school emphasizes face-to-face communication and traditional methods of information exchange. I like that, face-to-face. Get up close and personal, you know what I'm saying? There's no foolishness. New school embraces digital technology, social media, and online communication as a primary means of interaction and information sharing. Now you can kind of see where this gets a little bit different and difficult, right? If everything you learn is off a computer, but the originality of it is not embedded in you from the teacher, you might get the wrong information, right? Another thing that differentiates the opinions and mindsets would be work and career. The old school values job stability and long-term employment with a single company. The new school prioritizes career flexibility, freelance work, and entrepreneurship, often changing jobs or career more frequently. So you can see how some people would prefer something more stable. Some people would prefer to jump around and find all kind of new angles. That's all good, whichever one works for you. But these all come down to something later on. Thirdly, we'll get into values and relationships. Now, the old school emphasizes traditional family values, loyalty, and in-person social connections. Whereas the new school values diversity, individualism, and may have more varied forms of relationships, including online friendships and communities. Now that's a very, very interesting way to look at it. I almost feel like the whole world is so individual. Everybody just wants to be themselves. No one wants to be part of a collective anymore or anything traditional. It's unfortunate, but you know, these are differences. Little differences, and are nothing big. And then again, we have information consumption. I like this one. So the old school trusts established sources of information such as newspapers and television. Now you can see right there where in this new school, that has been completely changed. Before, it used to have some integrity behind it, where they would want to give you the real news and not just fake news, as the orange-faced man would say. But the new school relies on digital platforms, search engines, and user-generated content for news and information. Now, news right now is a very, very touchy subject. Most people don't know what's real or what's not because of the fact that it's mainly influenced, especially the mainstream media, by political agendas and where they're trying to direct you to go. So a little bit has changed with that. A lot of old school people got to understand that, hey, some of these new freelance forms of news are very valid, and some of them old school ways is how they got people ingrained in their new school train of thoughts, just because you can't trust nothing else. This is the only way you get your news, right? So you're going to be swayed by what they're showing you if that's your trusted source, you know what I mean? Another difference that they might have is mindset and innovation. The old school may resist change and stick to traditional practices and beliefs, whereas the new school embraces change, innovation, and adaptability as an essential part of progress. Now, everything has its time. The new time is definitely a time where you have to embrace change. Some of the old school and traditional values should still be upheld. You can't just change everything one shot and expect there to be some kind of congruency in that. You kind of gotta know what to change, what to keep, right? And then another difference could be personal identity. Oh, this one is a big one. I'm not gonna get too deep, you know what I'm saying? But the old school identity often is tied to established societal norms and roles, whereas the new school encourages self-expression, fluid identities, and acceptance of diversity in gender, sexuality, and lifestyle. Yeah. So a lot of these different points that separate the two of us, it's coming from a long history of things in place and a new history of what people want to change. Like, for instance, with work and career, I understand that stability is what a lot of people look for, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with being flexible, working freelance, being an entrepreneur, picking up more forms of how to get paid. Because I know a lot of older people, they're stuck in their portfolio. They're pretty much stuck on whatever they came up in. Like, I tried to have a couple conversations with older people about diversifying their portfolio, as like saying, hey, you got all this money that you're sitting here with, not so much your stocks that you've had, but maybe invest in a side hustle. And all of them are like, no, I mean, that side hustle something, all this risk, I don't want to throw my money nowhere. They're very stuck in their ways. But then they retire and they get $3,000-$4,000 a month to live off of, and they're poor, but they're alive for the next 20 years, but they don't have no financial freedom because they're too scared to take a chance and diversify themselves and be more flexible, right? And that is not always a good thing, you know what I'm saying? In terms of sticking to job security, I believe it's better to diversify your portfolio and also find something that's secure as your main source of income, and then also have passive incomes as well to support that, so you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. Excuse me. We all know that companies go under, they get bought out, they fire people, you become obsolete. So it'd be smarter for you to diversify your portfolio in that sense of, hey, maybe there's other things I could do with my money that will keep me from ever being in a position where I don't have or I can't afford it, right? Young people, y'all good at that. They'll throw their whole life into something. Balls to the wall, as they call it, you know what I mean? And I appreciate that. A lot of people who are no longer in the youthful category should try that approach. Don't be stupid with it. But still, diversify your portfolio a little bit. You know what I mean? And with values and relationships. See, traditional family values is a really hot topic right now because, with the gender fluidity and people breaking the norms and all these things, I kind of have a little bit of apprehension towards that because it's like, without order, there is chaos. And if everybody does what they feel is right for them, how are you really going to figure out what's right for society? Because everybody can't just do what they want. You know what I mean? Like, there's speed limits for a reason. There's limits to things. There's rules. But the new school now, they want to take away all the rules and just do what you want, live free. It's like we're all the new school hippies. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't really agree with a lot of that because the young people who are coming up who have no clue about who they are in themselves are never going to find it in a world that encourages everybody to just be impulsive and do whatever comes to your mind first. You have to have some sort of traditionality to what you're doing in order to know where you really want to go, where you really want to be. I mean, with everything so fluid, there's many people who are, led to believe that they want to be like this and they want this type of life and they want these type of things. But in the end, they're left feeling more alone and more lost without a purpose. And, to find a balance between traditional and new school is always the best. And that changes for every person. It's not going to be a one-size-fits-all kind of fix, you know what I mean? You kind of got to figure it out, but you still have to do some research into your history before you and currently to see where you want to go in the future. Most people don't want to have anything to do with history. They just want to deal with now and in the future. But your history will show you where you came from, what works, what doesn't work, and what you should keep, maybe implement in the future, and maybe try to change with the times, right? And most people are stuck in their ways. They don't want to change anything. Most people don't want to listen either. They don't want to be told how to do something new. They don't want to be told how to move, how to adapt. And that, to me, I think is extremely dangerous, right? So now when it comes to things like a society and traditional and culture, right? These things were all put in place by people long before us, right? And as it says about society, it describes a group of people who live in a definable community and share the same cultural components, right? So in order for you to change society, you kind of have to understand where people are coming from in the beginning and what they hold dear and why. You can't just say, oh, no, that's wrong. You old people don't know what you're talking about. Let's do it like this. Nah. We did the, and you're going to turn those people against you because they're very afraid of what's new because it hasn't been tried, tested, and true. A lot of things in society that we consider traditional have been tried, tested, and true through generations. A lot of these new opinions that seem to come out every other day, they have no basis. They have never been tried, tested, and true. It's all like, this is the trial and error. And that is not necessarily a good thing. You don't want to be part of the first generation that's doing all the trial and error because a lot of y'all gonna get swept under the rug. And these are things that are passed down from generation to generation. So a lot of the new school norms, and think about it like this before I go into that. A generation is 20 years. Some of y'all 20 years ago were still in single digit life, which means by the time the next 20 years comes around, who knows what you're gonna wanna keep from your culture to pass on to another generation. So I find with a lot of these differences that people have, it all boils down to respect and the interactions, right? So the interactions, as we discussed, is the action or influence of people, group, or things on one another. And a lot of people aren't considerate of the interactions. They're not very considerate. They don't care how people see them. They don't care what other people think, what other people went through. And that hinders their interactions. I mean, you could be talking to somebody and not even caring about that person and how you interact with them, and they could hold the key to your future, that if you were just be nice and just be cordial about your discussion and not be so abrasive with your point, they would be able to further you. Now some of y'all saying, I don't care, I'll do it myself, I'll get it out the mud. Fine, I guess you like being dirty. I don't. I prefer to interact with people on a respectful level, to be understanding of where they're coming from. And also, I've done my research into history. I've studied a lot of the different analytics about a variety of topics. So when it comes to making a decision as to who I'm going to allow to have influence on me, it's usually fact-based and very logical from history and the facts that are presented, right? So most people don't go off of facts. They go off of what they heard somebody else say, build an opinion because they've been influenced by that and they agree with it, and then they combat everything else from the other side. That's not really smart. That's why it feels like there's such a huge divide between young people and old people. Some of the younger, old school mentalities, they don't want to listen. Same thing with the new school. So it's kind of a give and take. The older generation, we kind of have to learn how to pass on things that are positive and how to adapt to the new. And the new school has to learn how to accept some of the old school ways and things that have been traditional for a while, just from, the history standpoint and the data that will come up for it, and still be present enough to think about the future and be the leader of that generation. And it's never going to be an easy thing, like in the parable that Jesus was trying to talk about. He's pretty much trying to explain that you don't really want to mix the new with the old, and the old will always be better than the new. I'm not saying it's the word of God, I agree with everything, but in society, it's not necessarily that the new will never be as good. I believe the new is not as tested as what is traditional. And that comes from generations of it working correctly. And again, a lot of the things about culture, about tradition, about society are based off of the Bible. I mean, the Bible talks about the beginning all up until Jesus, right? And I don't care what you think about Jesus. It's 2023. We're counting that man's death. He must have been important, right? So you kind of have to look at why these things were a tradition. What was the purpose of putting these in place? Was it to restrict everybody and make everybody feel less free? Or was it to keep the society and the culture from being in chaos? Because without order, there is always chaos, right? So really basically, I think it's a good thing for people to listen to both sides and be logically based in everything that you're doing. Your emotions will overtake you, will have you not listening to information just because you don't like the way somebody said it to you. That's not really smart. And if you're the type of person that's giving information that should be considered valid, you should think about on an interactional level or how you're going to convey this type of point so you don't offend people who you're really trying to help. So those little small things, like, it boils down to consideration fully, but those little small things are paramount in moving forward and bridging this gap that we seem to have between the old school and the new school. Because you can't get rid of the old school, and the new school can't function without the old school. Everything. Think about your iPhone. The first one came out 15 years ago. But if that one didn't come out, this new one wouldn't come out. So you can't cancel one out. And the new one is what people use now. You can't use that old stuff, right? But it's still an iPhone. Still the same company. See what I'm saying? So there has to be a middle ground and some continuity from the old school into the new, right? So essentially what I'm saying is we all have to do more of our homework before we base our opinions off of what an influencer said, or what the news is telling us, or what people from from our culture specifically are telling us, and from what our society is saying. We've really got to do a lot more research into it and look deeper for the logic behind these things and where they come from. That way it'll give you an easier opinion on what should be kept, what should be moved on, and what should be forgotten. I do believe that the traditional norms, they weren't there to hold people back. They weren't there to harm people or to constrict people to anything. I think they were there to make life way more simple. Because if you look at now, especially with the idea of sexuality and gender fluidity, there's many people on those spectrums who are much more confused than when it was just simply two genders, right? Doesn't matter what side of it you're picking, there's still some bit of confusion in that because you've allowed so many different opinions to sway, to pressure the norm, the traditional. But it didn't add any more clarity. I mean, I see a lot of people who are upset about that and confused. So I ask, what is this all for? What is the purpose behind these changes? If it's just for selfishness, where it's only for you so you can feel good, well, what does that have to do with the rest of your society, the rest of the population, the rest of the people who need some type of guidance? What does your freedom do for them? How close are you bringing those people to clarity, since you seem to have found it? Selfishness is a huge part of the culture now. Before, it used to be more people would do for another household or another family or for someone else. Now the culture is teaching us to be extremely selfish with ourselves and with our information, right? And that's not necessarily a good thing whatsoever. And I pray that as time goes on, we'll find some peace in this chaos between what should be normal and what is normal right now. Because no one wants to feel confused or lost in any shape, form, or fashion. And no one wants to ostracize the other side. I mean, we all have older and younger people that we love to death. We wouldn't want to drive a wedge between none of them. Doesn't matter where you're at. So if what you think and believe is driving a wedge between you and someone else that you love, you kind of got to sit back and be more considerate and just think about how we can bridge that divide without ostracizing anybody. You know what I mean? I think that's the best way to go, especially when it comes to this old school versus new school opinions. You know what I mean? We could go on forever about this and talk about it in depth for 6 more hours. And in fact, I'm gonna bring a lot of people on from both different sides. We're gonna have a group panel one of these days when everybody's schedule is free, you know what I mean? Especially me, myself. So this is definitely a topic that I would like to dive into further with a lot more people in it, so we could just get a whole bunch of more opinions versus, some fly young brother out here talking that stuff, you know what I'm saying? So I hope this has been some sort of clarity to you. I hope this has given you some type of new perspective on how to bridge the gap between the old school and new school, what these things really mean and the definition of words that people use all the time that some of y'all might not understand. So, if you got any value from this content here, please click like, subscribe, share, all that. Let this show get the reach it's supposed to and reach the people it's supposed to. Let YouTube know we are here forever, baby. Once again, this is War on Culture. My name is Uncle Chisel. Y'all be good out there.